The road between Callow Village and the farm at Marsh End was exactly 1 mile and 3/4, and Grace Morrow had walked it every evening for 4 years without incident, which was why she saw no reason to stop walking it when the evenings began to draw in at the end of September and the light was gone before she reached the last half-mile. She was not a foolish woman, and she was not a reckless one, but she had grown up on that road, and she knew every bend of it and every sound it made at night, which sounds were animals, and which were wind, and which were the particular creak of the old oak at the field corner that sounded like a door and was not, and she had stopped being afraid of any of them before she was 12 years old. She walked to the village each morning to open the linen shop that had been her mother's and was now hers, and she walked home each evening at 6:30 when she closed it, and in the summer the light lasted long enough that the walk was pleasant, and in the autumn the light did not last, but the walk was familiar enough that pleasant was not the only thing it could be, and familiar was sometimes better than pleasant anyway. She had been doing this for 4 years, since her mother died and left her the shop and the responsibility of keeping it going, which she had done, not because the keeping was easy, but because it was hers to do, and she was not in the habit of leaving things undone that were hers to do. The shop was small and dealt in household linens, the practical kind, sheets and tablecloths and kitchen cloth, and it served the village and the farms around it, and a few of the better houses at the county's edge, and it paid its way, which was what she needed it to do, and she managed it alone, which was what the managing required. She was 28, and she lived at Marsh End with her younger brother Tom, who was 19, and worked the farm their father had left, and she walked the 1 3/4 each way, each day, not because there was no alternative, but because the walking was the only part of the day that was entirely her own, and she valued it for that. The traveller appeared on the 3rd evening of October. She had closed the shop at 6:30 as usual, and come out into the lane to find the evening already dark, the sky a deep blue-grey above the hedgerows, and she had set off at her usual pace toward Marsh End, and had been perhaps 10 minutes along the road when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not panic. She was not a woman who panicked, and she had heard footsteps on this road before, people going the same direction, and she moved to the left side of the path, as she always did, to allow room, and kept walking. The footsteps stayed behind her, not close, not threatening, simply there, at a consistent distance, the footsteps of someone walking at approximately her pace, in approximately her direction. She said, without turning, "Are you going toward Marsh End?" A pause. Then a voice said, "I am going toward the Kessler Inn, which I am told is in that direction." She said, "It is." The Kessler Inn was 2 miles past Marsh End on the Dunbridge Road. She said, "You are welcome to walk with me as far as the farm turning, if you like." The footsteps came alongside her. She glanced sideways. A tall man, plainly dressed, a traveling coat, a bag over one shoulder, nothing that said anything in particular about who he was. He said, "Thank you." He said it simply, and they walked on in silence for a moment, and she thought nothing more about it than that he was a traveller going to the Kessler and had joined her on the road, which was the ordinary thing that happened on country roads in the evening when one person was going the same direction as another. He said, "How far to the farm turning?" She said, "About a mile." He said, "Is the road straight?" She said, "Mostly. There is a bend at the oak tree, and then it straightens again, and you will see the Marsh End gate on the left." He said, "I will follow you to the gate then, if you do not mind the company." She said, "I do not mind." They walked. He did not fill the silence with the kind of talk that people fill silences with when they are uncomfortable in them, which she noted and approved of. She said, "What brings you to this part of the county?" He said, "Business." She said, "At the Kessler," he said, "near there." She did not ask further, because it was not her business to ask further, and he did not offer further. And they came to the oak tree, and she said, "This is the bend," and they went around it, and the marsh end gate was visible 50 yards ahead, her brother's lamp in the window of the farmhouse beyond it. She said, "That is the gate." He said, "Thank you for the company." She said, "The Kessler is another 2 miles, straight on the same road." He said, "I know the way." He said it without rudeness, and she understood from it that he had perhaps known the way before she told him about it, and she thought briefly that this was interesting, and then let it go, because travelers often knew the roads they were traveling and did not always say so, and there was nothing in this that warranted any particular attention. She said, "Good evening." He said, "Good evening, miss." She went through the gate and up to the farmhouse, and she did not look back, and when she was inside, and Tom was asking about supper, she had already stopped thinking about the man on the road, because there was nothing to think about. He was there the following evening. She came out of the shop at 6:30, and there was no one on the lane, and she set off as usual, and she was perhaps a 1/4 mile along the road before she heard the footsteps again, the same pace, the same distance behind her. She said, without turning, "Good evening." He said, "Good evening, Miss Morrow." She turned then. He was the same man, same coat, same bag, and she looked at him with the direct look she gave things that wanted examining, and said, "You know my name." He said, "I asked in the village." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I was going to be walking the same road again this evening, and it seemed discourteous to do so without knowing the name of the person I was walking it with." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "What is your name?" He said, "James." She said, "James what?" He said, "James Callard." She said, "Are you still at the Kessler, Mr. Callard?" He said, "Yes, for another few weeks." She said, "Is the business taking longer than expected?" He said, "It often does." She said, "What kind of business?" He said, "Land matters." He said it without evasion and without elaboration, and she found both of those qualities, the lack of evasion and the lack of elaboration, satisfying in the same way that a well-made thing is satisfying, not because of what it does, but because of what it does not do unnecessarily. She said, "Then you are going the same way tonight?" He said, "If the company is welcome." She said, "It is welcome." They walked. The evening was cool and clear, and the stars were beginning to show above the hedgerows, and the road was familiar under her feet, and slightly different with another person on it. Not worse, different, the way a familiar room is different with a fire in it when it has been cold. He said, "How long have you had the shop?" She said, 4 years. He said, "Before that?" She said, "I helped my mother in it from the time I was old enough to be useful." He said, "Your mother is gone." She said, 4 years. He said, "I am sorry." She said, "It was not a sudden death, which is a kind of mercy." She did not explain further, and he did not ask for further, and she noted again that he did not ask for things that were not offered, which was a quality she had found rare enough in people that she noticed its presence the way you notice the absence of a sound you had grown used to, and then, unexpectedly, do not hear. They came to the gate, and she said, "Good evening," and he said, "Good evening, Miss Morrow," and went on down the road toward the Kessler. She went inside, and Tom said the soup was on, and she sat at the table and did not think about the man on the road. She thought about him a little. It was the 3rd evening that established the pattern. She came out of the shop, and he was in the lane, not waiting exactly, moving, as though he had arrived by coincidence at the same moment, which she did not entirely believe, but which she did not interrogate, because she had decided by the third evening that his presence on the road was not a thing she needed to interrogate. He was a traveler on a public road going the same direction she was going, and if the timing of his going was consistent with hers, that was either coincidence or consideration, and either way it was not alarming. They walked. Each evening they walked, and each evening they talked, and the talking was the kind that built on itself, which was the kind she had not had for some time. He asked questions and she answered them, and she asked questions and he answered them, and neither of them asked questions they did not mean, and neither of them answered questions they had not been asked. And within a week she knew that he was from the north originally, that he had 2 sisters, both of whom were married, and whom he visited when his business allowed, that he had been coming to this part of the county for the past 3 years, on and off for the land matters, which she still did not fully understand, that he had read more than she expected a man conducting land matters to have read, and that he had a habit of pausing before he answered a question that was not hesitation but consideration, which she had identified by the third pause as the difference between the two, and which she liked about him more than she was entirely comfortable with. He knew by the same point that she ran the shop alone and had done for 4 years, that her brother Tom was 19 and sound, and that she did not worry about him except in the general way of older sisters, that she had walked this road since before she could remember and knew it better in the dark than in the light, because she had been walking it in the dark longer, that she read when the shop was quiet, and that the books she read were not the kind that were recommended to women in her position, but the kind that interested her, which were not always the same. He said on the 5th evening, "What are you reading currently?" She said, "A history of land enclosure in the eastern counties." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "How are you finding it?" She said, "Partial, but useful." He said, "Partial how?" She said, "The author has a position, and he has arranged his evidence to support it, rather than following his evidence to wherever it leads, which is the habit of a man who has decided what he thinks before he has thought it." He said, "And the useful part?" She said, "The primary sources he cites are real, and some of them are interesting, independent of what he does with them." He said, "Which sources?" She told him. He said, "The Hartley survey in particular is underused." She said, "You have read the Hartley survey?" He said, "I have reason to be familiar with it." She said, "Land matters." He said, "Yes." She looked at him sideways. She said, "You know a great deal about land enclosure for a man conducting unspecified business near the Kessler Inn." He said, "The business is not unspecified. It is land matters." She said, "Which covers a considerable range." He said, "Yes." She said, "Are you an agent?" He said, "Not precisely." She said, "A surveyor?" He said, "Not precisely." She said, "Mr. Callard, I have been walking this road with you for 5 evenings, and I know less about what you do than I knew about you on the first evening, which is an unusual achievement." He said, "I know what I do. I am less certain how to describe it to someone who does not share the context." She said, "Try." He said, "I manage land." He said, "Specifically, I make decisions about how land that is in my care is used, and what happens to it, and who benefits from it, and what is owed to the people who live and work on it." She said, "That is either very large or very small, depending on how much land is in your care." He said, "It is on the larger end." She said, "How large?" He said, "Large enough that the decisions about it are not simple ones, and that the land matters near the Kessler are one part of a considerably larger set of matters that I try to attend to personally when I can." She said, "Why personally?" He said, "Because decisions about land affect people's lives, and I find it difficult to make those decisions at a distance." He said, "I would rather see a thing "Then read about it." She said, "That is not the habit of most men in that position." He said, "No." He said it without pride and without modesty, only as a plain fact. And she thought about the Hartley survey and about a man who came to the road himself rather than sending someone else. And she put these things together in the way she put things together, which was carefully and without rushing to a conclusion. She said, "Is the business near the Kessler going well?" He said, "Better than I expected." He said, "I came thinking it would take a month, and I find I am not in a hurry to have it finished." She looked straight ahead at the road. She said, "The Kessler is comfortable then." He said, "The Kessler is adequate." He said it with a dryness that surprised a laugh out of her, which surprised her, and she heard the laugh in the night air and thought that she had not laughed on this road in 4 years, and that the sound of it was not as strange as she might have expected. He said, "That is the first time I have heard you laugh." She said, "I do not laugh a great deal on this road in the dark." He said, "I will take it as a compliment that you laughed on it now." She said, "You may." They came to the gate and the lamp was in Tom's window, and she said, "Good evening, Mr. Callard." And he said, "Good evening, Miss Morrow," and she went inside. Tom said, "The soup is better tonight," and she said, "Good," and sat at the table and thought about a man who was not in a hurry to finish his business near the Kessler, and about adequacy as a category distinct from comfort, and about the Hartley survey, which was indeed underused. She thought about these things in the plain way she thought about things, without dressing them as other than what they were, and what they were was interesting, and she allowed them to be interesting without deciding what the interesting meant. The second week continued. The road continued. The evenings were cool and clear, and then one evening it rained, and she came out of the shop at 6:30 into the rain, and she thought he would not be on the road in the rain, and she was wrong. He was on the road in the rain, in a coat that was better waterproofed than hers, and he said, "I should have thought to bring a second coat," and she said, "You could not have known it would rain," and he said, "I knew this morning, the sky had the particular look," and she said, "Then why did you not bring a second coat?" And he said, "I did not think until now that I should have brought it for you rather than for myself." And she said, "That is a very roundabout way of saying you were not thinking ahead." And he said, "Yes, it is." And they walked in the rain, and it was very much the same as walking without the rain, except that she was wetter, and the road smelled of wet earth, and the sound of the rain on the hedgerow was the specific sound of rain on October leaves, which was different from any other sound. He said, "Does the shop roof hold?" She said, "Mostly." He said, "Mostly." She said, "There is a corner that does not hold as well as the rest of it. It has needed attention for some time." He said, "What kind of attention?" She said, "A roofer." He said, "Have you not had one?" She said, "I have had one priced." "It is more than the current month allows," he said. "And next month," she said. "It depends on the month." She said it without self-pity, because she did not feel self-pity about it. It was only the arithmetic of the thing, and the arithmetic was what it was. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Is the corner over the stockroom?" She said, "How did you know there was a stockroom?" He said, "Most linen shops have one." She said, "Yes, the corner is over the stockroom." He said, "And the stock?" She said, "I move the fabric when it rains." He said, "And have been moving it." She said, "Since August." He said, "That is a tiresome solution." She said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Have you spoken to the building's owner?" She said, "I am the building's owner." He said, "Then you are both the person who needs the roof fixed and the person responsible for fixing it." She said, "Yes, it is one of the less convenient aspects of ownership." He said, "Yes." He said it with what she had come to recognize as sympathy, which in him was not the performed kind, but the kind that came from actually understanding what a thing was like, and she received it the way she received things from him, which was directly and without making more of it than it was. She said, "Is your coat actually waterproof, or do you only think it is?" He said, "I am beginning to have doubts." She said, "You are wet." He said, "Yes." She said, "You are wetter than I am." He said, "That is because I gave you the right side of the road where the hedgerow overhang is." She had not noticed him do this. She thought about it now, and found that he had been doing it since the first rainy evening, and that she had not noticed because he had done it without making anything of the doing. She said, "You have been giving me the sheltered side of the road." He said, "Yes." She said, "For how long?" He said, "Since the first time it threatened rain, which was the 7th evening." She said, "I did not notice." He said, "I know." She said, "Why did you not say anything?" He said, "It did not seem worth saying. It only seemed worth doing." She walked for a moment in the rain on the better side of the road with this, and she put it in the part of her mind where she kept things that were what they appeared to be, which was a small part, because things were rarely what they appeared to be, but which was growing. They came to the gate. He said, "Good evening, Miss Morrow." She said, "Good evening, Mr. Callard." She said, "Go and change out of that coat before you catch cold." He said, yes, he would. She went inside. Tom said, "It is raining." And she said, "I noticed," and went upstairs to change, and she stood in her room in the dry, with the sound of the rain on the window, and she thought about a man who gave her the better side of the road, without saying so, and she thought that she was going to have to stop pretending she was not thinking about him. She stopped pretending. She did not stop walking the road, which she would not have done regardless, but she stopped pretending that the 1.75 miles had the same quality it had had in September, because it did not, and she was not a woman who wasted energy on pretending things were other than they were. The 3rd week brought the question she had not asked. She had not asked it because she had not been ready to know the answer, which was the only honest reason she had, and which she accepted. She asked it on a clear evening, a cold one, with frost beginning to show on the grass verges at the edges of the road, and she asked it the way she asked things, directly. She said, "Mr. Callard." He said, "Yes." She said, "You have been on this road for 3 weeks." He said, "Yes." She said, "The Kessler is 2 miles past my gate." He said, "Yes." She said, "You have been walking me to my gate every evening for 3 weeks, and then walking 2 more miles to the Kessler in the dark." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He was quiet for the considering pause. He said, "Because the road is dark in the second half, and you do not carry a lamp." She said, "I have walked this road in the dark for 4 years without incident." He said, "I know." He said, "That is not quite the reason." She said, "What is the reason?" He said, "I wanted the walk." She said, "The walk to the Kessler." He said, "The walk with you." He said it plainly and without any attempt to make it into something it was not, and she heard it plain and received it plain, and they walked in the cold, clear evening for a moment in silence. She said, "And the business near the Kessler?" He said, "The business near the Kessler is concluded, has been concluded for the better part of a week." She stopped walking. He stopped. They were standing in the middle of the road in the dark, with the frost on the verges and the stars overhead, and she looked at him and said, "The business is concluded, and you are still at the Kessler." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "I told you." She said, "The walk." He said, "Yes." She said, "Mr. Callard." He said, "Yes." "Miss Morrow." She said, "What is your business in this county?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I own land here." He said, "I own a considerable amount of land here." he said. The estate of Dunmore is mine, and has been mine for 3 years, and the land matters near the Kessler were part of the management of it which I came to see, to personally, because I prefer to see things personally. She stood in the road and looked at him in the dark. She said, Dunmore. He said, yes. She said, you are the Duke of Dunmore. He said, yes. She thought about 3 weeks of road and the Hartley survey, and the sheltered side of the road in the rain, and a man who was not in a hurry to conclude his business. And she put all of these things together, in the plain way she put things together, and she looked at him and said, and your name? He said, James Callard is my name. He said, the title comes before it in formal situations, and I find I have been spending 3 weeks in an informal situation, which was something I did not plan, and which I have not wanted to end. She said, you told me your name was James Callard. He said, yes. She said, you did not tell me you were a duke. He said, no. He said, I did not tell you, because you were the first person I had spoken to in 3 years who spoke to me as a person, and I was not going to correct it until I had to. She said, you had to tonight. He said, yes. He said, because the business is concluded, and I cannot in honesty stay at the Kessler without a reason, and the only reason I have left is this road, and this road is yours, and I will not walk it under false pretenses any longer. She said, they were not false pretenses. He said, they were incomplete ones, which is close enough to matter. She looked at the road. She said, you own Dunmore. He said, yes. She said, Dunmore includes the village. He said, yes. She said, the building where my shop is. He said, yes. He said it quietly, and she heard in the quietness of it that he had known this for 3 weeks and had said nothing about the roof. She said, you knew the building was yours. He said, yes. She said, and the roof. He said, Miss Morrow. She said, the roof that I told you needed fixing 3 weeks ago. He said, I had it put in the maintenance order the following morning. He said, it should have been done in the first week of October, and it was not, and I am sorry for that. She said, you ordered it fixed without telling me. He said, it was already my responsibility to fix it. I was not doing you a favor. I was doing my job, she said, and the 3 weeks, he said, were entirely separate from the roof. He said, the roof was my responsibility as the building's owner, and I would have ordered it fixed regardless of anything else. He said, the 3 weeks were not a transaction. She was quiet. She thought about what her mother had told her, which was that the road was safer walked with someone, and about what she had discovered herself, which was that the road was different walked with someone, and about what she now knew, which was that the someone had known things she did not know and had still walked beside her and given her the sheltered side in the rain, and asked questions and meant them, and answered questions without evading them, except for the one question she had not asked until tonight. She said, why did you not simply send someone to manage the business near the Kessler? He said, because I prefer to see things personally. She said, is that the whole reason? He said, it is the reason I came. He said, it is not the reason I stayed. She said, the walk. He said, yes. She said, 3 weeks of 1.75 miles. He said, 3 weeks of 1.75 miles, and a conversation that has been the best part of every day of those 3 weeks. He said, I am aware of what I am and what you are, and the distance between those two things in the world's accounting, and I am not asking you to ignore that distance. He said, I am telling you that I have been walking this road because it is where you are, and because talking to you is the thing I want to be doing, and that is as plain as I can make it. She said, it is very plain. He said, yes. She said, You are the Duke of Dunmore, and you have been walking 1.75 miles of a country road in the dark for 3 weeks because you wanted to talk to a woman who runs a linen shop. He said, I have been walking it because she is interesting and honest and does not say things she does not mean, and reads the Hartley survey and knows which side of the road is sheltered without having been told. She said, I did not know you were giving me the sheltered side. He said, you know now. She said, yes. She looked at the gate, which was 50 yards ahead, the lamp in Tom's window. She said, the business is concluded and the roof is being fixed, and there is no reason for you to be at the Kessler. He said, no. She said, how much longer were you going to stay? He said, as long as the road was available to walk. She said, the road is always available. It is a public road. He said, yes. He said, but walking it alone is not the same thing. She said, no. She said, it is not. She turned toward the gate. She said, Mr. Callard. He said, yes. She said, James. He was very still. She said, the business near the Kessler is concluded, and you have told me the truth of it, and I have told you I would rather know the truth of a thing than not know it, and I do, and that is the truth of where we are. He said, yes. She said, you can walk back to the Kessler tonight, and I will walk to the shop tomorrow morning, and the road will be between us in both directions. He said, yes. She said, or you can come in and have soup with Tom and me, who is 19, and will almost certainly ask you more questions about Dunmore than you are prepared to answer, and we will deal with the rest of it from there. He was quiet for the considering pause. He said, what is the soup? She said, Tom is making it, so I genuinely do not know. He said, I will take the risk. She said, good. She went to the gate and opened it, and he came through it behind her, and the lamp was in the window, and the frost was on the grass, and the road behind them was the road it had always been, 1.75 miles of familiar dark, with the oak tree at the bend, and she had walked it every evening for 4 years, and would walk it every evening still, and it would not be the same road again, which was not the same as saying it would be worse, which it would not be, which she knew, and which she was not going to pretend she did not know, because she had stopped pretending things she did not believe 3 weeks ago, on an October evening, when a man appeared on a public road and said he was going toward the Kessler Inn, and gave her the sheltered side in the rain, without saying so, and meant every question he asked, and she had found, to her own considerable surprise, that she had been waiting without knowing she was waiting for exactly this, and that the road home had never been so short. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next one.